more that I need to do and should do. Sandra was a reluctant caller into the therapist's office and was clearly hesitant to admit that she had reached a point where she needed answers to questions that she could no longer convince herself she could answer. She admitted to the intake screener that she was suffering from feelings of overwhelming anxiety and had slipped into depression and needed to be seen as soon as possible. In the initial counseling session, Sandra detailed a series of responsibilities that would have overwhelmed all but someone with superhuman powers. She worked as an office manager for a bustling medical practice and took complete responsibility for everything that happened within its walls, and worried extensively about every aspect of the physician's business, as well as every employee's job duties. She also described the rigors of being a parent of a rambunctious 2-year-old and having assumed custody of one of her sister's children to prevent a foster placement, a 6-year-old girl. Both regularly tested her limits and demanded as much attention and her energy as they could capture. To add to this already loaded family life, both Sandra and her husband had elderly parents who lived within driving distance that required some level of monitoring. Neither set of parents could provide any meaningful assistance with the children due to their own health problems. When she described this set of burdens, the therapist noted that Sandra was especially committed to dotting every I and crossing every T in all areas of her life. She was very much a perfectionist in making sure that every possible task was done to its fullest possible point of completion, even the ones that seemed to be relatively unimportant. Sandra admitted that her life was merely one long and endless string of duties and tasks, that life was basically just one giant conveyor belt bringing her things that needed to be done. And she admitted that she was starting to rely too heavily on the medication that her physician had prescribed her in order to try and manage her stress and unhappiness. Sandra admitted, "There is always something that needs to be done," and added, "I've just come to believe that if something needs to be done, I'd better do it myself." I generally believe that the world of adults is divided into 2 categories of people. People who are not responsible enough and have way too much fun while accomplishing or producing next to nothing, and people who are too responsible and do nothing but produce while they have forgotten how to have any fun in life. I guess you could say that as a therapist, I would not have a reason to see people who have well thought out balance between responsibility and recreation, and that people whose porridge is just right would be the ones blowing up the phone at the counseling center. My experience has been that I generally don't get to see too many people for the first group either, whose porridge is ice cold, unless they get drug in by some angry spouse or boyfriend/girlfriend who has been fed up with their nonsense. They're usually pretty content to look at the world like it's a giant pinball machine, and they're the ball, and they're too busy experiencing all the lights, buzzards, speed ramps, and hitting all the bonus targets to be too much worried about self-improvement. So the person who's walking into my office, more often than not, has a hot bowl of porridge that they can barely stand to hold on to, and they are sick and tired of being overwhelmed by life's demands and just can't take it anymore, just like Sandra in my illustration. Let's start off with a couple of foundational and ground-level assertions about what is true in the statement that there is always more I can do and should do. First of all, it is absolutely correct that there is always more that can and should be done in anyone's life. As I sit here voicing in this chapter on my laptop, I have outlines of 4 other books that need to be written and I feel strongly about. There's a box of stuff that we've accumulated that needs to be listed on eBay and sold. I have a garage that needs to be swept out and finished being painted, and there is a giant hamper full of laundry that came out of the dryer this morning and that needs to be folded and put it on hangers in my closets. I'm guessing that you, the reader, can come up with a very similar list right off the top of your head at any given moment on any given day. Everyone has a garage sale that needs to happen, and everyone has a house that needs to be better organized. Everyone has things both on their to-do list and their bucket list. Sandra was not at all wrong in her visual and conceptual assessment of the world around her, or the list of tasks that she had that she had created in her mind. That is my first response to this statement that people say themselves regularly and repeat often in my office. The second fundamental thing about this statement is that Sandra and the other people that think and feel like her are fundamentally responsible and good people who are trapped in a mindset where they are doing too much of a good thing. The world can use more producers and less consumers, to be sure. I have had a fair amount of business owners come into my office over the years in different locations, and the one thing they unanimously have stated is that it's impossible to find enough good people to hire. Without fail, every single one of them has had tales of woe regarding employees being lazy, irresponsible, or expecting way more from the business than they were willing to provide for the business. The world needs more hardworking people who take life seriously enough to do things the right way and being where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, and keep their word and commitments. I absolutely like and respect the Sandras of the world, and I'd like nothing more than seeing them come to a greater appreciation of their own character and build self-esteem, while at the same time learning to mix a little fun and relief into their daily lives. I don't think there is any great mystery as to the whys and wherefores and motivations of adults that don't live like adults and have the work ethic and responsibility of a 6-year-old. That's exactly why they act the way they do. They have simply carried on the childhood view of the world around them to something to be enjoyed and consumed, and have chosen to be someone who doesn't want to develop the work ethic of a producer or the responsibility of the parent in a family. So the question is not why do people let the porridge go cold, but rather what causes people to go over microwave porridge to the point where it's burning in their hands and they can't stand to eat it. How do people become entrenched in what I call the work-parent cycle of misery? This is how I describe the person whose life is a Groundhog Day, getting up early in the morning and waking the kids up to get them fed, dressed, and sent off to school, then putting in an 8 or 10 or 12-hour work day, and then coming home to make the kids dinner and supervise their homework and get combatants, and then clean up the house before they go to bed and play on their phones for a couple minutes before falling asleep and starting the whole routine over again the next day. I believe the answer is it's a combination of unmanaged anxiety with a lack of appropriate perspective on daily life that gets a giant portion of perfectionism dumped into the mix. This all swirls together to create a giant boiling cauldron of stress, hopelessness, and overall unhappiness with life that brings about depressed mood. People who have become trapped in the vicious cycle cannot see any guiding light that will take them out of the tunnel because they are afraid of criticism and failure if they are not perfect in meeting all the possible responsibilities that come up daily and weekly. They also tend to see life in terms of all or nothing thinking, which, as we have talked about in previous chapters, is one of the foundational 10 cognitive distortions that were identified and listed as core values that promoted depressed thinking and behavior by the forefathers of cognitive behavioral therapy. To achieve anything less than perfection is failure, and will bring about an expectation of criticism, either from others or from one's own internal inner critic that speaks from the deep recesses of one's mind. If the house isn't cleaned completely, then that means that one is a failure as a homemaker. If one does not get a perfect evaluation at work and not living up to the job description, if one does not successfully check off every box on the to-do list, then they are being lazy and unproductive. These are the hallmarks of all or nothing thinking, and the chief ingredients in that nasty witch's brew of misery simmering in the cauldron. My approach is to first address the anxiety in sessions with people who are suffering from depression and self-criticism because of this statement echoing in their ears. I teach a technique called sequential processing. A process to assist people in reality testing anxious fears and help them develop the ability to see and maintain appropriate perspective. I explained this technique by telling a story from my pre-college days when I was wet behind the ears, barely 19 years old, who had just been promoted to his first meaningful job as a shift manager at Domino's Pizza in a college town in Texas. To consolidate the story, which is much more colorful in its details when I tell it in person in sessions, we got absolutely slammed on Saturday in a torrential downpour to where we were buried in late orders from probably 2 p.m. in the afternoon until the end of dinner rush around 8:30. After it died down, I remember sitting on the edge of the manager's desk in his office while he did a check deposit, and I asked him how he managed not to get stressed through the hours and hours of hammering. The dialogue that followed went something like this. Why would I get stressed out? Vic, we got absolutely obliterated. I mean, blown away. So what that we got blown away? Vic, we were buried. We had late pizzas for hours and hours going out the door. So what that we had late pizzas for hours and hours? Vic, we had probably 40 late orders so far today. Each late order got a discount of $3. So what that we had 40 late orders so far? Vic, we've given away over $120 so far, and there's probably more we haven't even counted. So what that we've given out $120 so far? Vic, we turned the paperwork into the main office, right? They're going to see this. So what if Andrea, the office manager, sees we had $120 in discounts? Well, she could get upset. So what if Andrea gets upset? Then what? I don't know. Maybe she tells the area manager, Ray, and he gets upset. So what if Ray gets upset? I guess he could call and chew you out, Vic? So what if Ray calls and chews me out? I guess he could write you up for the late orders. So what if Ray writes me up? Pause. I don't know. Maybe he would suspend you from work? So what if he suspends me for a few days, even a week? Vic, I don't know. What if he fires you? So what if Ray fires me? Pause. Geez, Vic, I'm at a loss. What would you do if Ray fired you? Vic showed the first sign of emotion that he had all day. He suddenly raised his hand up in the air, then brought it crashing down onto the table in a silent, shattering slap, and said emphatically, "Let me tell you what I do if they fire me on Monday. The first thing I do is pop open a cold Corona and head down to the pool in my complex. I'd kick back and watch all the beautiful college girls that go swimming around lunch while I'm here sweating in the store, and I'd relax. Then I'd call the registrar at school and sign up for full-time classes starting after the summer. I've got about $20,000 saved up from working the manager here. So I don't really need to work for the next few years. I figure I can finish my engineering degree in about another year and a half instead of going part-time like I am now and finishing in 3 years. I know I'll make way more money when I get on with a firm than I'm making here. So this sounds pretty good to me. In fact, they'd be doing a favor to fire me the more I think about it." I just sat there in kind of a stunned silence for a minute until Vic looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure, Vic." He took a long pause and then said with a mischievous smirk, "You know you worry way too much, kid." I remember walking home from work to my apartment and thinking about that exchange, and how Vic, who was a mature guy that everyone looked up to as a good leader, managed the stress of the day. What I saw him do during duress was react to stress of the moment by processing out a sequential string of potential consequences if everything went a negative direction. At the end of this string, Vic had already determined that there wasn't really anything harmful waiting for him, so he wasn't going to panic. Me? Well, I hadn't developed that skill yet, so I stayed in a perpetual state of anxiety during the rush with a vague but powerful dread of whatever consequences that I hadn't yet identified. That left me exhausted and spent. Vic later laughed at my reaction and questioned why I got so worked up when I was just a shift manager that wouldn't have been held accountable for whatever happened on his watch. He also suggested that the higher-ups in management weren't stupid and weren't firing or even getting mad about a rush that couldn't be anticipated or staffed for. I got the memo. So what I would say to Sandra, or anyone else that tells me that they live with this statement of there's always more I need to do in their head, persecuting them, is, so what if you don't get this one thing done or everything on your list done? What will happen negatively that will meaningfully impact you or your loved ones if you don't have a perfectly clean kitchen counter or dishes in the sink for a few hours? What if you do miss your 9-year-old son's 4th soccer game of the season? So what if you don't get a perfect evaluation at your yearly review and only got a 5% raise instead of a 6.5? How will any of these possible consequences reasonably cause any real harm to you or anyone around you? This process of questioning is how you get rid of some of this over-responsibility once you've inherited it. By examining the cost to you and your family and the people around you, if things either do or do not get done, you naturally place things in an appropriate context, and this effectively combats an all-or-nothing line of thinking. This is how you manage the perspective part of this problem. The perfectionism portion is similar, but slightly different. The variation strain of perfectionism at the heart of this voice statement takes something true. There's always something more I can do, and tries to make it actually happen as if it's something that can and should be accomplished. Let's say that you are in charge of the canned vegetables and soup department at a supermarket, and those 2 aisles are your responsibility. In theory, you would want to have perfectly symmetrical line of cans organized by type with all the labels facing exactly forward. To be sure, this would be the desired standard that anyone up the ladder in supermarket management would want it to look as nice and probably should be that way. But does it really mean anything if they aren't? I mean, is this sort of obsessive order going to sell more cans of pork and beans? Or prevent someone from slipping on a wet spot on the aisle? Or even improve profit margins for the chain? And if it really is something that you can reasonably achieve, and is it something that you can really achieve? And is it really something that you can reasonably achieve no matter how hard you try or how disciplined and responsible you are? It would take you setting up a tent in the store and keeping a 24/7 vigil for every can that gets moved a few spots over or gets turned to one side by a reluctant or questioning buyer. Is worrying about what can't be accomplished and wouldn't make much of an impact if it did, worth the internal sweat and misery that line of thinking brings? What I would say to Sandra, or any of you who spends their precious energy trying to cross every T and dot every I, is to openly and consistently reflect that to be in this position means that you have proved your responsibility and ability to be a mature, productive member of society many times over, and you deserve to see yourself in a positive light. Then we would discuss how you are not a human pack-mule who needs to be stuck carrying supplies up the mountain every day for the rest of your life, and you deserve to enjoy some fruits of your hard work and responsibility. If we can agree to this, then we should start working on internally giving yourself permission to do something else other than to stay on the work-parent treadmill, and instead have some pleasurable and fun experiences that bring balance and meaning to the grind of life. It's okay to prioritize going out shopping and to dinner and letting some household chores wait. It's okay to spend some money on a weekend trip, or spending a lazy weekend afternoon reading a paperback and having a glass of Chardonnay. It's not the end of the world if you miss your kid's game, or be 15 minutes late to pick up your cousin at the airport, or wait an extra day to cut the grass. Be successful and responsible about the things that truly matter and not the things that don't. Make sure to have some memorable nights on the beach under the summer moon. Sandra's therapist spent several sessions validating her stress and providing an honest and reliable reflection that the emotional and physical workload that she had assumed was excessive and would be experienced by anyone else the exact same way. At the same time, her therapist also began to shine a light on Sandra's habit of taking due. At the same time, her therapist also began to shine a light on Sandra's habit of taking on duties that either did not need to be done in any kind of pressing manner, and also the fact that she frequently stepped in and did tasks that were responsibility or concern of others. Using some basic cognitive behavioral techniques, her therapist began challenging Sandra to look at everything that needed to be done and start differentiating between essential tasks that needed to be done for survival or basic functioning versus those things that were essentially luxury tasks that didn't need to be done with any urgency. This was difficult for Sandra because she had always thrown everything in her life into the urgently needs to be done pile and reacted with extreme emotionality and stress to everything in it. The therapist started this process by getting her to buy into the reality that there truly are endless things that need to be done in order to achieve a perfect work and home environment, and pointed out that there was no humanly possible way to cross everything off that list on a daily basis. Once the therapist was able to get this buy-in from Sandra, separating the high priority items out of the pile from low priority items became much easier and real progress could be made. The therapist used the concept of sequential processing, with my permission since I coined the phrase, with her to help identify low priority tasks by examining and proving logically that no real harm would come to her life or anyone else's life and family if they did not get done immediately. In this way, Sandra was able to begin self-regulating for stress and acknowledging that if her living room window did not get wiped down with Windex every other week, then no real existential harm would come to her or anyone else, and her stress reduced accordingly. Sandra graduated from therapy considerably less stressed and less anxious and less dependent on medication to regulate her emotions. And when she said to herself, "There's always more I need to do," she was able to justify by remembering difference between urgent and not urgent tasks on a daily basis, and added, "But that